Hi, everybody. I'm Gwen Eiffel, and welcome to the Washington Week Webcast Extra, where we pick up where we left off on the weekly broadcast. I'm joined around the table by Gene Cummings of Bloomberg News, Greg Ip of The Economist, David Sanger of the New York Times, and Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report. The nation's governors are in town this weekend, meeting among themselves and with the president. This is what the president told Democratic governors last night. The challenge we have sometimes in politics, he said, is that the national politicians and the national races get all the attention. But so often the action, how our policies are actually impacting our constituents day to day, are being determined by governors and state legislatures. Does the president have a point, Amy?
I think he even said he wanted to bring sexy back to midterms, right? Very Justin Timberlake bringing sexy back to the midterms.
I'm not sure I can bear that.
The thought of when we see our nation's governors and sexy next to them,
exactly,
we don't know that it's really working.
One or two.
Look, we know that traditionally not only are states the laboratories for federal legislation, but they are also the breeding ground for presidents, right? And so it's actually rare that we have a former senator as president instead of a governor. We're going to be looking to these governors in 2016, especially these ones in the Midwest who were elected in 2010 to terrible economies. They had an opportunity to put their policies in place and to try to sell that, to say, look, you handed me this terrible economy. I did X, Y, and Z. Now look where we are. They're going to be judged in 2014, and they hope that that is going to help propel them to 2016.
I find it interesting that among the things they go through when the governors come to town is they all go to dinner and cocktails at the White House, and Chris Christie decided not to go.
It's his daughter's birthday, apparently.
Oh, well, okay, he's got a good excuse.
But still, there are a couple others that had other things to do. Andrew Cuomo is not staying, apparently, either.
Oh, well, in that case, whatever. So much for that theory. But there is one governor who we're in this mix who we're all keeping an eye on who did not have a good week, Gene. Scott Walker of Wisconsin, speaking of Midwest governors.
Yes, and Scott Walker, another 2016, maybe not. Chris Christie was probably reading as much of the Washington state media as he could this week.
Yeah. Wisconsin state media.
Wisconsin, right, thank you. This scandal and investigation has been swirling around Governor Walker for quite some time, and
even before he was governor.
Yes, and so it's been really murky. Though, what were they doing? What are they targeting? And it became clear this week when a court, by way of media demands, released hundreds of emails that were between his staff for his race for governor, the first one. He and his staff back at his county executive offices. And
they're not supposed to communicate. They're not supposed to coordinate. And that's really highly illegal in Wisconsin, especially.
In Wisconsin, especially. Yeah. They have very tight laws about anyone using government time to do campaign activity. And they are not supposed to talk to each other. You live here, you live here. And the emails show that the staff included everybody in the reply alls. It was, it included.
There's no evidence that Scott Walker himself was coordinating between these two staffs.
He is not on the emails. However, what he has said over and over again was that he was, adamant that this not happen. He was on top of it. He didn't allow it. Well, he didn't do a very good job, if that's what he was doing.
Neither did Chris Christie, and
exactly.
People didn't do it.
So, this one is different than Christie because it does not affect everyday people,
right? The
way the traffic jam did. And while this kind of behavior might be highly offensive in Wisconsin, in South Carolina, they may shrug.
It's not.
Greg, I want to take this back to Washington because one of the interesting things we wait for every year, we're in February now, aside from spring, is the president's budget proposal. And this week we found, sounds very arcane, but inside this proposal, we're beginning to get an indication that the president has given up on a key issue that he used to really press Republicans for, and I'm going to let you, I'm not going to use the term, okay, I'll use it, called chained CPI. Explain what that means.
Okay, so this is something, actually it's something that Democrats were very much opposed to doing, changing the indexing of Social Security benefits. But it was something that Obama offered to the Republicans to show that he was willing to take on entitlements as an act of good faith to deal with the deficit. Why does this matter? Well, Social Security benefits are indexed to inflation to make sure that a beneficiary doesn't fall behind as the price of stuff goes up from year to year. But how you measure inflation is a very tricky concept, and it turns out that over time, most people will stop buying something that's expensive and buy more of something that's cheap. So, for example, if your landline is going up in price but Skype is free, you'll use more Skype and you'll use less of your landline. But if you don't change the CPI to reflect that fact, it will overstate inflation. The change CPI gets around that problem by updating the basket of goods and services that a representative consumer buys. And it turns out that over time, if you do that, you end up with an inflation rate that's slightly lower. And if you index Social Security to that slightly lower inflation rate, you can save about $100 billion over the next 10 years.
So why give up on it now?
Well, because the president put that on the table first as an effort to draw Republicans to the table during the fiscal cliff negotiations about a year and a half ago. He was saying, look, we need $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. I'm willing to take on a sacred cow because Democrats hate the idea of cutting Social Security benefits, even if it's just to reflect a slightly different inflation
and he discovered somewhere along the way that was getting him absolutely nothing. So.
Well, that was exactly his logic. You know, Boehner has made it clear he's not going to negotiate with this president again. So why would Obama have it out there and continue to get beat upon by his own base when he's not getting anything in return? It's important to point out, though, that the White House has said it's still on the table at any time the Republicans want to come back and do a real deal.
Because that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, that was the single best explanation I have ever heard.
Me too. I felt like I was
I'm so smarter now, except it could go away any minute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you have the tape.
I just keep replaying it. David, another thing which is baffling, which is what is happening in Vienna. We saw that John Kerry has put himself out there and said, we're going to figure out a deal with Iran. And they went and they met again, and now we're waiting another 6 months for something to happen? What's the deal?
Well, you're going to have a busy 6 months. But look at it this way. If we could go from Justin Timberlake to change CPI, how hard can it be to discuss uranium enrichment?
I don't know. This is your chance to prove it.
Okay. So here's where we were. At the end of last year, a temporary agreement was reached in which the Iranians froze the amount of uranium that they were enriching. This is what everybody fears could be ultimately used for a bomb. And the idea was to give some time and space for a real agreement to get negotiated. And what started in Vienna this week was the beginning of that real negotiation. And they've got 6 months to work out a deal, and it's extendable by 6 months, which means it will be extended by 6 months, okay? So we're going to be talking about this for the next year.
Right.
The key to this right now, to making this work, is the United States has to come up, and the Europeans, with a way that would extend the amount of time that it would take Iran to race for a bomb if it ever decided to go do that. It's a big argument about how much time you'd need to have the notice and to be able to react to it. The answer is probably somewhere between 18 months and 2 years. And that means that they've got to get the Iranians to actually dismantle equipment that they've built up, and they built up most of it during the Obama administration. That's very hard to get the Iranians to do, just to find a face-saving way to go do that. And in fact, you've heard from many senior Iranians over the past couple of weeks, including their president, we're not dismantling anything. So everybody is now working on ways to come up with formulas that would give you that warning time.
Does Russia loom in the background on this issue as well as it does on every other thing?
It does loom, but not the way they do in Syria.
Yeah.
I mean, the Russians don't want to have a nuclear Iran any more than we do. That said, it's not high on their priority list. They could live with a nuclear Iran. They worry that we're building missile defense systems that we say are about the Iranians and they believe are actually about the Russians.
You guys managed to make governors and emails and change CPI and uranium enrichment. Fascinating. Aren't you glad you stayed and you watched? Thank you, everybody. Stay online and see what else our panelists are writing about every day. That's on our daily Washington Week feature, Essential Reads. You can find all that and more at pbs.org/WashingtonWeek. And we'll see you next time on the Washington Week Webcast Extra.